Good evening, friends. I believe time is of the essence. A lot of things are going down at the moment. You can see a lot of the evils going on. But in terms of what we're going to do, as far as people, what can we do today? Certainly reporting indictable offences. That's a big one. We have the obligation to report a crime, don't we? We have a way to report the crime. Obviously, talk to police. And I know police have somewhat limited response, certainly depending on the matter that you bring before them. And as I've found myself, there's very limited interest when you start talking about the validity of their own police act. But anyway, I had an idea talking about these state cops that have been operating on police acts that have been made by a parliament that is sitting unlawfully. Say the state has replaced its constitution, say New South Wales 119 years ago. Victoria did theirs in 1975, so that's coming up to nearly 50 years of having had a fraudulently sitting parliament that's disobeying the Commonwealth constitution. It doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter whether the Queen herself has passed this the Constitution of Victoria. So I believe someone's actually lodged a High Court complaint, a case in Victoria, and it fell over in the High Court, where he said that the Victorian Parliament, he said the Victorian Constitution's invalid. That's what he said. But his thing that he relied on was that he said that the Queen hadn't signed it off. But I think that's not the issue. The Queen could have well signed it off, but the Queen didn't write the legislation. So it's not, for example, it's not the Queen's fault for writing legislation that is unlawful and against our Commonwealth Constitution. Let's say, for example, what if the Queen's not exactly privy to Section 106 of our Commonwealth Constitution, and she's been put into a position of compromise to sign off, say, Victoria's state constitution, which now puts it foul of the Commonwealth Constitution. She's been put into a position by even the high-ups, so let's say, for example, that she has signed this thing off, and in all cases, either the governor's assent, or which is as an agent of the Queen, the governor's assent, even within the case of New South Wales, the governor had assented to the New South Wales Constitution replacement. So it's been signed off, but you have a look at the cases where the High Court has shown laws of the land to be invalid anyway. Even though they have been signed, all laws, for them to become a law, they have to be signed off by a governor. So at some point, even governors are signing off on unlawful laws, and the High Court's finding them are unlawful. So don't be put off, and I wouldn't be put off by the fact that, okay, that case in Victoria fell over where they were trying to complain about the Victorian Constitution is actually unlawful. But the premise of their argument was that that they hadn't gotten the Queen's assent. But let's say, no, they did get the Queen's assent. But where's the proclamation? Where's the engagement with the people? Where's the social contract? Have a look at it from that angle. Where's the social contract? And it's blatantly against Section 106 of our Commonwealth Constitution. Even if they were all in it together, it's still against Section 106 of our Commonwealth Constitution, regardless, which locked in these state constitutions at that time. So basically, looking at it from contract law, you can't just change the contract arbitrarily between you and someone else and then expect to get off scot-free and say, well, look, it's essentially the same deal, but I just rewrote it, so we're all good, aren't we? No, that's against contract law. You would be in heaps of trouble. Imagine if you did that to a mining company. Wouldn't you be in millions of dollars of litigation? And you would be in huge trouble. This is what these creeps have done. And they've totally, the Commonwealth Constitution, get that in our heads. The Commonwealth Constitution is the law of the land. It is the highest law in Australia. It's the fundamental law, right? Everything has to find its constitutional basis back to that. So no state law will be able to find its constitutional basis back to the Commonwealth Constitution to fit in the Commonwealth context, while ever that state is sitting on top of a constitution that's been made after federation. In a sense, put it this way, we had a deal. and you guys changed the deal on us. So therefore, we don't have a deal. The deal is off. And your state now is totally sitting foul of our Commonwealth, right? And I think it was McGuinty versus Western Australia, that High Court case. And the judge, I don't know if it was, it might have been Gleeson, maybe him, if I remember clearly. He said that I think it was that case. I can't quite remember. It was that one or another one that I maybe a little bit confused, but just bear with me. There was a decision of the High Court that did say that the passing of the Commonwealth Constitution created a new federal polity, which means it created a new federal polities like where you get political from. It created a new social contract, for lack of a better word, social construct even. The Commonwealth is that. So if a state is going to join in the Commonwealth, essentially they have to submit their constitution to it. That is their binding document. That's the thing we can tell that that's the same state that's in the Federation. That's the fundamental document. It's not the territory. We're not talking about territory to show that that's in the Federation. We're talking about the constitutions of the states were bound into the Commonwealth Constitution effectively by Section 106. So what you could say, and what it even says in Quick and Garran, what it says under Section 106, as a bit of an explainer, it says that at the Federation, the beginning of the Commonwealth, you could say that the states' constitutions were bound in as like attachments to the Commonwealth Constitution, effectively creating one massive constitution. So when a state goes to change its constitution and replace it, it's no longer in that context. That's it. Game over. The deal is off. Okay? The deal is off. Doesn't matter how much they want to modernise it. They had the provision of Section 106 to be able to alter their constitution. Essentially, you can do whatever you want. I'll put it in my words, and I know some may say that altering only gives a certain parameter. But essentially, when you read those original constitutions, they were allowed to repeal parts of their own constitution. So, essentially, what you should expect to see at Federation and today, what you should expect to see is our Commonwealth Constitution plus the state constitutions in force at that Federation with whatever alterations that those states had chosen to do up until the present day. That is Australia. Okay, that's it. The Section 106 says the constitutions of the states shall continue. That's it, shall. It's not a should, it's not a maybe, it's not a, well, if it suits you, depending. No, it's shall. It's a contractual word, shall. The states' constitutions, like at Federation, shall continue. That's it, continue. As in, from this point on, from the commencement of the Commonwealth, those states' constitutions shall continue for time immortal. You know, that's it. They shall continue from that point until time immortal. What have they done? They've replaced their constitutions. So you can't say that they've complied with Section 106. So they're no longer a state in the Federation. Now, the ones that we see now, Western Australia has kept its original constitution. Good on them. For whatever reason they've kept it. But South Australia, Tassie, Victoria, Queensland, New South Wales, they've all got brand new constitutions that they made themselves. And so what that is, that they're now creatures of their own statute. They're creatures of statute, but they're creatures of their own statute. See, when Queen Victoria, give you a bit of an explainer, when Queen Victoria allowed the states to have constitutions, she put them into a schedule. So she created an act. First of all, she created an act that said an act to basically allow the states to have a constitution and to confer a civil list and blah, 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 which essentially was giving like a financial schedule on how to run the finances type thing, the amounts of like bounty or whatever it was in the thing. But I know certainly in New South Wales's case, they had the Act. So it was called 18 and 19 Victoria number 54, which was passed in 1855. And then they'd bound into the schedule of that constitution. They'd bound into that the constitution that New South Wales wanted. So New South Wales had drafted it. But when it went over to England for approval, England changed a few clauses in it and then said, okay, now this is the final version. We'll then give you this constitution with the changes we've put in. But they attached it to a schedule that was supported by an act of the UK Parliament. So the UK Parliament did not enact the 1855 Constitution directly. They enacted the act that enabled the state to have the Constitution. Okay? So essentially, it's like a coat hanger. What they did, the 18 and 19 Victoria number 54 is like a coat hanger where you hang the state's constitution off. But in parent form, it's supported, it's hanging on the coat rack of the UK Parliament. Okay? With 18 and 19 Victoria. That's the 18 and 19 Victoria is like the coat hanger, and the coat rack is like the UK Parliament. So you've got the UK Parliament and then the coat hanger, which is 1890 Victoria, and then hanging off the coat hanger is the state New South Wales State Constitution, 1855. Okay? With the clauses in it that allowed them to play around with that constitution and basically write their own future with it. But herein is the thing, and this is what they've done, is that they've scrapped that copied it, but said, oh, well, we wrote it anyway. That's essentially what the state said. Like, we wrote it anyway. So we'll just take that bit and then we'll go and create our own constitution with that, plus all of our amendments that we wanted to put in and all these other things, and then bind it into its own act. We'll enact it. And no longer are the states' constitutions an act of the UK Parliament. They are an act of their own parliament. And once you think about this, let this roll around in your head for a while and you start thinking about, okay, look, if somebody else gave you the authority to be who you are depends on and hangs on the fact that they have certified you to be that thing that they say you are. But if you go and self-appoint yourself and write your own accreditation, for lack of better words, like if you wanted to be an engineer, and you're an engineer because the state has you've passed the tests and the state has said that you're an engineer and they've put their little stamp on you, and you can go around trading as an engineer as long as you have that piece of paper that proves that you're an engineer, but your engineering certificate hangs off the validity of the state authoring body that gives you your engineering certificate. Essentially what the states have done is said, oh, well, that's okay, but what we'll do is we'll photocopy that engineering certificate and then we'll just write it up ourselves and we'll pass our own engineering certificate. So we'll self-qualify ourselves as an engineer. I'll grab it off someone else. My mate, I'll grab his engineering certificate. I'll just put my name on it, photocopy it, and then there it is. I'm an engineer. So this is what the states have done, okay? And you need to understand what's happened in law, but this is what they have done. And effectively, they're now self-authorizing themselves. And they've relied on the assent of the governor or the Queen to say that that's okay. But they've totally changed their law dependence and the enacting authority type thing that their state hangs off. The same way our Commonwealth Constitution still hangs off an act of the English Parliament. It does. So the context is, because our Commonwealth Constitution hangs off the English Parliament, all other states' constitutions should hang off the English Parliament in the same way. But it's not. And that's what they've done. And And this is a fundamental change. So everybody lives in a state. You know, this is the thing that where we're going to have to deal with this, because everybody lives in a state and everybody abides by Commonwealth law plus lawfully made state law. Okay. But if your state is no longer sitting in the federation because they've changed their own constitution and it's effectively created a new legal state called New South Wales that's in the same territorial boundaries as the one at federation. So it's a superimposing of a new legal identity that's claiming the same territory. It's like a squatting, if you understand what I'm saying. It's like a brand new company moving into the building and saying that this is our place now. That's what's happened. When each parliament enacts their own constitution, they are claiming the territory that their law applies to as well. And when you read their state constitutions, where this is a concern is because they're saying that, you know, the northern boundary is this, the southern boundary is this, the east and the west, whatever the boundaries. The state constitution sets out the territories that the constitution applies to. So what you can say is that at federation, the federation applied to the sum total of all of the states' constitutions. So therefore that gave you the law basis for Australia. And then the Commonwealth Constitution ties it all together. But when you have a state that has created its own constitution now, they're sitting as a new legal entity in the Commonwealth of Australia that's not in the Federation. But they've claimed the same territorial boundaries as the state once had. So therefore that has an impact to all of the property titles that are within it. So when, you know, Torrens title system and all that, how does that relate back all the way through authenticity back to the original Crown grant of land and all of the laws and things that have changed along that time? And even when a state's replaced its constitution, something funny's gone on there, especially when you've got companies like or entities like Land Registry Services that are supposed to be managing the land and title deeds and stuff. It's going to get a real mess. And then you've got a bank that may have been a bank created within, say, the state of New South Wales. Say, for example, the Greater Bank. I know it's predominantly New South Wales based. And so who's given the bank authority to begin trading within New South Wales? Was it a state authority? Was it a state authority that has come into effect after 1902, after the Constitution's been changed? So therefore, you could say that the validity of the bank to trade in New South Wales is on very, very shaky ground. In fact, it's fraudulent. Not because of what the bank's done, but because of the state having changed and the parliament having changed their constitution. That's what's going on. And so really, with your home loan, I mean, I've got a home loan and I'm thinking about this. How can we begin to get right things happening here in Australia? I mean, I know there's problems no end, but how can we begin to sort of get ourselves on the right foundation? I've been thinking about this, and one thing that comes to mind, you can talk to your blue in the face about this constitution. They would say, well, it's been enforced for so long, no one cares. And you would wreck everything to change it. And that's true. I mean, it would create a huge mess. But the reality is we can't go on like we are. And we have many other forces at work that if we don't stop them, then we're going to be just brought under the bus. And the fact is that we can't tolerate a crime happening, even if it's by our own state parliament. Because if they've done one crime, they're going to keep doing other crimes. And the other thing that's weird to me is that if they've replaced the Constitution, there'd be smarter people than me that know all about this that have covered it up. and legislators are covering it up and trapped in the system. So firstly, they need to be freed from this bondage that they're in of having to keep this thing quiet. They need to be dealing in law lawfully, right? They can't afford to have their consciences compromised. That's a reality. We can't let this go on. But in terms of it, what's happened? What if there was another parliament that was sitting that we didn't even know about? This is what I thought. What if there's another parliament sitting back on our original constitutions, and the one we see is the false one, but the real one is dealing in the land rights as such as it really is, but sitting in a way that we don't even see them? But what if that's happening? What if that's very possible? Because if they know this law and they can sit back on the original constitutions, they have a more authoritative position to claim use of the land, and all of the home loans as such that, and buildings and everything that we're doing now is all sitting in a state of fraud. But if they're actually dealing with in true law, because they know, if they're doing something else, they can pull the rug out from under us. You know, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here. But this is why this needs to get sorted, because, and it needs to come to a head. And, you know, so I thought the way to go forwards with this, and I've just sort of spoken my mind, is that, let's say I dob myself in for a potential crime, being party to an offence of a fraud. Say I dob my own self in, and my crime is that I'm paying for my home loan, right? So all transactions, money exchanging hands, has to be lawfully made. Otherwise it's a crime, isn't it? You know? And if the crime is that the banks are in on this thing and they're not establishing their own lawful basis properly, and they're charging me, and I'm paying them because I want to buy a home, and I'm paying my home off to them in good faith, but yet they're actually in on this deal and they know, and they're just sitting there collecting dollars. I mean, you look at banks, look at how they're operating. I mean, they hang on to your title deed until the last minute, don't they? And that's when you get it, until everything is paid right at the very end. And that title deed is a piece of paper. That's all it is. But the contract, if you breach that contract, they outlay no money that I know of. I don't know if they outlay any money at all for your property. You're the one entering into a deal with them on the property, but you've just entered a contract to begin paying. That's what you've done. You've entered a contract not to buy, but to begin paying. Begin paying interest. They live off the interest. But in a sense, if they're part of another, I don't know how they really work in the background, but if they're part of another system where they're not actually shelling out any money at all for your property because they know this is old dodgy, and they're hanging on to the title deeds of property, and so it's just swapping from bank to bank, essentially, then there could be a big crime with all this, you know? And so in a sense, dobbing myself in for, I haven't done it, but I'm thinking about doing it, is dobbing myself in for a crime of actually paying for my home loan, and see what it does. And say the cop said, oh no, it's not a crime for paying for your home loan, don't talk to me, then that's no problem. They just say go away. But if I said the reason for why I'm saying that I think it could be a crime paying for my home loan is because the state is sitting foul of the Commonwealth Constitution now, because it's on the wrong state constitution. And I don't have a confidence that I'm actually going to get my property that I've paid for. And I don't know whether the property's worth what they say it's worth. And I don't know what's going on with the true title deed of the property, whether it truly applies to this land or whether it applies to only the legal state of New South Wales, which is not in the Federation. And do I have a right to begin paying some posing state that's actually outside of the Federation if I'm one of the people of the Commonwealth? If you know what I mean? So if I dob myself in for those crimes on that basis and see what the cops will say, they would go two ways. They would say, look, I don't know, sounds too complicated, but if you say, well, no, fraud is a real deal and you guys are authorised to investigate fraud, and you've done your diligence by letting them know, then you might be able to issue your bank a statement. Just say, look, I just, I'm happy to pay out the loan as per my contract, but I just want to ensure that the contract is valid. Then you could come to an agreement with your bank that can we get this investigated? And your bank has a legal team. You'd be sure your bank has a legal team, right? Because they'd be first to try and prosecute you in the court if you don't pay and repossess your home. So you would be able to use their legal team to help you to work out this thing. But to bring your evidence and say, look, I can't see how this state that I'm in is actually part of the Federation anymore, and I don't know whether this legal state that I'm dealing with here with my property is lawful for me to be dealing with. And, so that would then put them in a tough position where they would have to receive your being honest to them, that you're telling them that I think there could be a problem. And so that stops the financial transactions potentially, or you could come to an agreement that, look, I'll keep paying once this is established, but that will then put an estoppel or like a pause on your payments with your home loan. So that will put pressure on the situation to have to get it solved, if you know what I mean. Like, because if they're not getting their money, they're going to be saying, what's the hold up? But if you said, we just want to establish that there's no fraud before we get on and sanctify this deal, then you've done the right thing. You've got it off your chest. The bank's under a lot of pressure to have to help establish the contract's valid. If you're wanting to point out that it could be fraud, they also won't be in a position to repossess your home while ever you've got a fraud case going on. So you could sit there for a while, and especially if your problem was that New South Wales's land is no longer the land that was in the Commonwealth Federation, then the bank wouldn't have much hope of selling your property if you could expose it straight away that that the reason why you've gone to the bank in the beginning and the cops is to establish whether the land's even in New South Wales as you think it is. So, in terms of if we all did this, then it gives the cops something to do. If the cops are looking into the validity of New South Wales as a result, and if you pointed out the constitution of the state is no longer the one in the Federation, I mean, they're going to start panicking straight away because they'd realise their police act is unlawful. And you wouldn't be able to go to a state court to have any of this heard, potentially, if the issue was that the state's not even lawful. And no one would be in a position to do anything with you, I think. Because just having a think through who's able to do anything to you. I mean, if the cops can't if the sheriff can't repossess your home because you're not paying, but you've told the bank that there's a fraud case that you want to have it investigated, then just thinking in who's able to actually make a move here. And on what grounds are they able to make a move? And if your investigation is going to engage the necessary teams to get a good, honest look at whether New South Wales is valid, and if they come up with the same set of question marks that I do, it's going to leave everyone in a really awkward position, and it would get the bank really nervous about their standing as a bank if they didn't know about this, And so what we could do with it, I think, is to get some financial waves going on in the States and give these New World Order guys something serious to think about if the states aren't sitting lawfully and the people have worked it out. And so therefore states can't do the New World Order's bidding, and we're onto them as fraudsters, and the cops can't be part of it because they're all committing crimes in everything that they do. I don't know. I just think it's a good move, to start turning the light onto this whole situation and to expose it and to use almost like confessing your sin of being party to the offence of paying your home loan. that you were duped into something that you're not aware of, but you've become partner to the crime, and that you plead for mercy, but you would understand if they're going to punish you in the law, and that you would take this to the full extent of the law and you would receive just punishment for the crime you have done, being party to the offence. But they won't be able to actually lay those charges on you if they realise their own state's in treason. But if they let you off, then they're in agreeance that their state's in treason. You know what I mean? Like, it's this catch-22 that you can put them in. You know what I mean? I hope you understand. Just having a think out loud, this is the way I think, but it could have more of a profound effect than saying no to the vaccines, whatever. But if we did something on a financial level, looking at the reality of our states being valid even in the Federation, this is going to chuck a stick in the spokes of this thing and hopefully slow it right down. So that's my thoughts, and don't take any of it as legal advice, but everyone says they're not qualified to give you legal advice, so we'll just talk about it anyway. But that's my view, and that's what I have a good mind to do, is actually report myself for a crime of inadvertently being partner to the offence of paying for my home loan, and I'm not sure whether the whole deal's not riddled with fraud. And I need the cops fraud team to give me a certificate to tell me that it's not fraud. You know what I mean? Get the cops to clean the deal to give me a certificate that this whole deal's legit. And if he can't give you a certificate, then you know it's rotten. And if they don't want to touch it because it's too hot a potato, and they say, well, it's on you, then you just say, look, I've tried to report the crime. I'm sure there is a crime here and I don't know what else to do. So why should I keep paying for my home? You know what I mean? So, hope it helps rather than adding more questions. But in terms of what we can do, that's what I think we can do. As I feel a bit confident to start rattling the cage of this whole thing and see what it does. God bless you, friends. See you later. Bye-bye.